Hello, everyone. This is Katerina Garavito with Rise. For those of you who are Rise members and familiar with Rise, thank you for joining us today. For those of you not as familiar with Rise, we welcome you to overcoming the what if moments we are facing to move forward. RISE stands for Rising Insurance Star Executives, and we're an organization devoted to growing, recognizing, and advancing the best young professional talent in the insurance industry. We were founded in 2016 to showcase the fun, innovative, and emerging aspects of the insurance field through our targeted networking events, interactive social media platforms, technology-driven development webinars like the one today. Another very exciting opportunity we want to share is our annual RISE Awards. The criteria for a nominee is to have less than 10 years of experience in the insurance space or under 40 years old. If you know someone in the insurance industry that deserves to be recognized, please nominate them for this award. We're still taking nominations until May 31st. Today, we have a very exciting webinar with the best-selling author, speaker, and consultant to the insurance industry, Bryan Falchuk. Bryan spent 20 years in the insurance industry, where he most recently was the head of claims for Hiscox USA before joining the AI-enabled insurtech communications provider Hi Marley to help drive their growth before founding IEP. With his unique experience on both the carrier and insurtech sides, he brings perspective to help carriers and their partners evolve in a market that's facing disruption. I want Bryan to elaborate more on his experience and current projects himself, but before I pass it over to him, I want to let everyone know on the webinar that if you have any questions, please wait until the end of the presentation. And at the very bottom of the screen, there's an option for you to type your questions in, and we will address as many as time permits. Without further ado, my very dear friend, Bryan Falchuk.
There we go. Hey, there's lots of what if moments with the technology this morning. So it's a good test of everything. Thank you for the introduction, Katerina. It's nice to see you, although my webcam's not firing up, so no one can see me. But I did get showered and changed and shaved and all the things that some of us forget to do in this current situation. So I'm excited to be here. I did want to share some thoughts with you guys about something I've been sharing through a book that I wrote, through coaching I've done, and speaking and mentoring folks for years now. And it's a philosophy that I call Do a Day, and it's what I have up on screen right now. It is a way of getting through tough moments, but more broadly, kind of life in general, because so often in life we find ourselves stuck between two things. And this is exactly where I think pretty much everyone is at right now. We find ourselves between the pain, the loss, the regret of yesterday. It's maybe something we're not doing anymore that we wish we were, someone we're not seeing, places we're not going. Maybe some of us have lost our jobs, and those are things that, we're feeling that loss right now, and it's weighing on us. And at the same time, and I think this is especially prevalent right now, a lot of us find ourselves trapped not just between yesterday, but the sense of tomorrow, all these what ifs, right? Whether, this will change. Will I get sick? Will people I care about get sick? Will I lose my job? Will I get that promotion I've been working so hard about? What will happen to, my business, my family, my friends, any of it? When will this end? These are very normal things to be feeling, especially right now. And I thought that, a good time for us to talk about this kind of stuff because it's something we can all benefit from. So a little bit of background on me. Katerina shared some of the professional stuff, but I want to open up a little bit personally. And it's the two folks there that don't have orange over their faces, my wife and my son, who looks nothing like that anymore. That was about a decade ago. They're the most important thing in my life. And there was a point in 2011 where it looked like I was going to lose at least one of them and just wildly fail the other. So for backstory here, I am someone who, despite a lot of positives in my life, I really struggled with very strong anxiety through my childhood into my teen and adult years. And it started for me as a result of my parents getting divorced when I was really little. And look, we all have something in our backstory. It's not a competition to say, what you went through is worse or easier or whatever. We all go through what we go through, and that shapes and informs who we are. And for me, from a very young age, I didn't feel like things were going to be okay. My family was coming apart. And as a little kid, you can't do anything about that. And you just need to know that everything's all right. And I didn't. And so I ended up trying to soothe that emotional hole with food because it's really comforting and it's not going away and it's not yelling or fighting or moving out. So the more I felt that anxiety, the more I turned to food, and I went from being this happy, smiley, active little kid pretty quickly, like within the course of a single year, to being pretty seriously obese. And it just continued on straight through my teen years, and got to a point where I was 100 pounds overweight. Obviously, I was not happy, and it was just out of control. And every day I remember waking up and having this conversation with myself about, like, today's the day you're gonna, stop eating like that and change things. And within an hour or two, I was done. I was right back where I'd started. I hadn't changed anything. And a big piece of it was the sense that, like, I have 100 pounds to lose. It's so much. No matter how hard I work today, I'm still gonna have maybe 99 pounds to lose. It's daunting. So all of the tomorrows, all the things I still had to do and what was going to happen and how hard it would be was just crushing me. And as I got a little bit older, I did learn some exercise tools, and I had a great mentor in high school who helped me to lose the weight, and just teach me the things I needed to know to get through it. And I ended up really thriving, being more physically fit, but I never dealt with why I was obese. The anxiety was still there. And actually, as I went through college and into my early career, um, the anxiety actually was rewarding me because I was really independent and really good at fixing things and seeing problems before they arose or before they got too big, because I kind of always thought the world was about to end. So I was like constantly jumping into motion to fix things. And I became a management consultant, and that's kind of what my job was. So, like, I was doing better in my career by freaking out about things more. So basically all of this anxiety really got out of control. And anytime someone talked to me about trying to do something about it, maybe seeing someone, talking to a therapist, something like that, I fought it really hard. And it just triggered more anxiety for me, because how can I go do that when I don't have time already, and the cost? And, I had every excuse in the world, like the weight loss. Instead of losing 100 pounds, I was looking at it as like making 100 appointments work. And I couldn't see that being possible. It's just too much. Well, fast forward through my early adult years, like a lot of people who lose weight, I gained a bunch of it back, and I didn't get up to the same weight I had been, and I didn't look obese again. I just looked, as I say, American. Like in that photo there, I don't necessarily look like I'm super overweight. I looked like everybody else. But the reality was, I was about 50 pounds heavier than I am right now, and that's not healthy. And then enter the summer of 2011, where my wife became very seriously ill, and our son was 2. It's not long after this photo was taken, actually. And she started to waste away. She was in really extreme pain, and it wasn't stopping. And every doctor that we saw, we'd go in with this hope, and they couldn't do anything, and they didn't know what it was. And they started to just blame her for it. You're just being anxious, you're just depressed, you're just, they use the word just and then blow it off. And so everywhere we turned for help, there was no help to be had. And for someone who thinks the sky is always falling, this was incredibly triggering for me and my anxiety. And so I went into like fixer mode instead of supporting mode. So I did a lot of stuff, but I wasn't standing by my wife emotionally, because I couldn't stop to do that because it scared me too much. And so I wasn't there for her the way she needed me to be at the scariest moment in her life. And for our son, I was the only parent he had on a daily basis, because my wife became bedridden, and I couldn't stop to be there with him, because I was constantly, trying to do stuff for her, or take care of him, make his food, or do the laundry or whatever, and also working full time somehow. Luckily I was able to work from home, but it's a lot to balance. And so if he wanted me to just stop and read him a story, that like I couldn't, and I was just very reactive about it. And so I was failing him miserably because if, he had any shot at being happy, watching your mother die in front of your eyes and your father just kind of flailing about is certainly not going to lead to happiness, as he grew up. And it all came together for me in this one moment where her doctor called to tell me he was going on vacation for 6 weeks. There was nothing else to do, and he would check in when he was back. And at that point, my wife was barely 100 pounds, losing 2 pounds every day, and no one could stop it. And it just hit me in that moment that she's not going to be here in 6 weeks. And when I said that to him, his response was, well, I'll just take her to ER. And he hung up. And I had to go back into our bedroom where she was and our son was and try to find some way to talk to her about this, despite, how scary it was. And my son turned and looked at me. And the moment he did that, I crumbled. That was the wake up call that I needed to see past letting this anxiety spiral out of control because I wasn't serving her, certainly wasn't serving him, and ultimately I wasn't serving myself either. So in that moment, I stopped having a choice of allowing the anxiety to rule my life, and I found a power I'd never felt before in that connection with her and with my son, and ultimately with myself, and valuing myself enough to want to feel better about things, that I knew I had to change, but also that I could change. And that's exactly what happened. And it started the next morning. And I want to preface the rest of the story with saying my wife is still alive, which was certainly not in the cards at the time, but um, through a lot of hard work and dedication on her part and a lot of lifestyle changes for all of us, she is still here today. Um, so how did I change and what did I learn? And this is what ultimately became this idea of do a day that I talk about and wrote about in my book. There's four components to it, and they weren't all crystal clear to me the next morning. But July 1st, 2011, I still woke up with this power, this sense that I had the night before, and I realized I could change. But I have to tap into this and figure out what is going on in me that's making me feel so different and giving me a sense that I can get through this. And the first thing, and actually this didn't hit me at the time, this took a lot more work to come to grips with, but it's self-love. And I think about turning our lives around and facing these challenges like building a house. Build a house of success in your life. And the first thing you do when you build a house is not pick up a hammer or nails or wood or any of that. It's you scout out solid ground. Because if you build that house on anything but solid ground, ultimately it's going to come down. It's going to sink, it's going to topple over, it's going to crack. So you need to find solid ground. And that's what self-love is. Self-love for me is a really hard thing. And it's something I think a lot of us struggle with. And I've seen so much of it right now where, in general, we tend to put ourselves down and it's like fashionable and funny. We get in these arguments with people about who worked harder or longer or slept less or is sicker or has less money or whatever. And the winner is the person who's worse off. And all we're doing is reinforcing the notion that we don't deserve to have it good. And actually, we do. There's nothing wrong with having slept enough last night or not being overworked or feeling good about how you did with something or how you look today. Those are all okay. And they don't make you an egotist just for thinking that you're okay. There's a lot more to the self-love equation, but it's the starting point, and we all need to spend some more time with it. So the challenge I would give you is don't play that game of who has it worse. If someone starts talking about how miserable they have it, don't start digging into that and saying you slept less or how hard it must be because you had it so much worse than them. It's not a competition. Just have a bit of empathy and be okay with maybe you being okay. The second is to find your why. And I'm going to get into that, but that's what was thrust upon me in that moment when my son's eyes met mine. And just the sense of like what actually matters to me in life is not this pursuit. It's not this freaking out every moment to try to keep the sky from falling. It's like, why am I even doing what I do in the first place? And I gotten very detached from that, as we all do when we get caught up in kind of the whirlwind of the day to day. The third thing is setting intentions. So that's about goals. And goals are really should be the big things you want to change in your life. When I had 100 pounds to lose, the goal is not 5 pounds. That's a step along the way. But you got to set your goal of where you want your life to be. And you need to set time around that. And you need to set points of measurement and ways to measure it so you can see how you're doing and you know what progress really looks like so you can celebrate it. And if you're not making progress, you can understand that and see where you might need to readjust. And last thing is what I really want to dig into today is this idea that I call do a day is really an execution strategy. And that's about freeing ourselves from the judgment of yesterday, the pain, the regret, the things we went through, the mistakes we made, and we carry all that forward today. And it sits on us. And if you did something that you regret, maybe you treated someone a way you wish you didn't, next time you see them, it's probably going to influence how you act around them. Now, it doesn't mean you just let it go and you don't take responsibility. You should, but you should address it and you should learn from it and you should grow. You don't just hold it inside, don't address it, and then interact differently with them because chances are you're not going to have a good interaction with them if you're sitting here with this angst inside. Same thing, if you're holding on to something you've lost, that's taking away from your ability to recognize and appreciate what you have today, or maybe take steps to get that thing back or get something better in the future. So we carry all these things forward into the present moment, even though they're not actually happening anymore. We can take the lessons from them, but we don't have to have them living on top of us right now. And the same thing comes with tomorrow. And this is where I think a lot of us struggle right now is it's all about the things, the what if moments. And that was in the topic, the subject of this talk is these what if moments, because that's what I see so much of these days is all the what ifs, the unknowns. How long is this going to go on for? And I kind of don't even want to repeat them all because we all know what they are. They're swirling in our minds and we're getting bombarded with them constantly from the news cycle. But it affects us. And so we sit here in this present moment afraid of those things. We have anxiety about them. We have fear. We have anticipation. And that consumes our thoughts. And that ends up directing our actions because we start doing things, or maybe we're frozen, in that fear. And so we're not doing things that could move our situation in such a way that none of those things ends up mattering. If you are so worried about, for example, you're doing the CPCU and you're worried about the upcoming exam, well, what if you just sit here freaking out about it? Is that actually going to make you better prepared for the exam? No, it's probably going to make your fear come true that you don't do well because you end up not studying or not absorbing because you're allowing this future idea of failing or struggling in it live in the present moment instead of taking action right here, right now to put yourself in a better position should that moment arise. Like maybe with enough studying and absorption of the material, you go into the test and you don't struggle with it. Maybe you're actually much better prepared than you thought you'd be. But if you have your mind set on being a failure in it or struggling in it, you're not really even giving yourself a chance to do well. And this is actually where self love can start to help. So when you think about these what if moments, you get into this mindset that you're not capable, you're not good enough. And if that's how you view yourself, the chance that you think you can get through that situation is much lower. But the thing I like to remind people of is this is not the first time you've faced a what if moment in your life. You've probably faced a lot of them. Have you ever stopped to reflect on the fact that you're still standing today? Like, doesn't that mean something? Of course it does. It means you're more resilient, you're more capable, you're more deserving of getting through these things. It doesn't mean that you crumble when you're challenged. It doesn't mean that you're incapable and you can't do well in whatever you face. Otherwise, you would not be here. So to recognize that our fear about all the what ifs, first of all, we don't actually know what's going to happen. Even if we're certain, even if someone tries to talk us out of it and we just think, oh, they don't understand, they don't get it, they don't know my situation, they don't know what happened, we still don't know what's going to happen. Just like that test example, you can think you're going to do poorly. You're going to think that you're going to struggle with it. but you don't know. You might get in and lo and behold, the questions they ask are the ones you actually were able to retain. Little did you know. You don't know what's going to happen. You're afraid of that conversation with someone because they're going to yell at you. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe they've had time to reflect on whatever reason you think they're going to yell at you about, and they've come to a different place with it. Or maybe because you haven't lived in the anxiety of that, you've been able to grow and learn from it, and maybe you approach them differently. Or maybe you think about a way to diffuse the situation or improve upon it. You don't know that it's going to be worse. And that's my point is we don't actually know what's going to happen. But when we get caught up in holding the weight from yesterday and being crushed by all these thoughts of tomorrow, we end up giving up our ability to do what we need to do in the present moment to make the most of our life. And this is exactly that kind of moment. You don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic, with your career, with your job, with your family, with your friends, any of it. And that's not to say it's bad. It could actually be good. You don't know. There's a lot of people that I've gotten to know over the years that have these terrible, like life crashing down stories. And everyone that I interview on my podcast or for research I've done behind my book, I have never found someone who says, I wish this didn't happen. That's not to say they liked the pain of it or, someone who lived through some of the California wildfires that happened a while ago, not the most recent ones. People around her died. They all lost their property. So it's not that she's wishing that upon anyone, but the growth she's had from that, the life she's built, the understanding she's come to have, she knows would be totally impossible without that hardship. And she's thankful for that growth and the support it's brought for others. So she can't unwish it. And that's where sometimes when we're in that spot of being crushed by the what ifs, we just can't see that. And so it takes mindfulness. It takes a presence in your mind to say, no matter what we think, it's always only today, right now. These things aren't happening. So focusing on them isn't going to serve us. It's only going to hold us back. I've gone on for a while. I'd love to open things up to questions and hear from people. Maybe there's something that you're struggling with that you want to talk about and see, how could you think differently about this and how can you bring a more mindful approach so you recognize what is happening right now or what steps you might be able to take right now that could make that what if irrelevant. And that's a lot of what we end up doing in these moments is saying, when we're in the midst of those thoughts is saying, hang on, is that actually happening right now? 99% of the time, the answer is going to be no. So then you need to ask yourself, well, what is happening right now? And what can I do about that? Or what could I make happen right now that makes that thing less of a threat, less of an issue, less of a likelihood? It's almost like risk management. So I'd love to open things up and hear from people. Katerina, I don't know if you're able to help with that.
Yeah, so we do have one question, and if you have questions, please make sure that you're putting them in the question section. But with a lot of layoffs taking
Yeah.
place right now, if I worked at a company where I was laid off, what do I say when I'm being interviewed for a new position as to my layoff compared to some of my colleagues who were not laid off?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's a very real thing that a lot of people are facing. I do think that this is actually, if you're going to get laid off, putting aside the job search to find a new job, from an explanation standpoint, it's always better to be laid off when there's a general acceptance that things are tough than when the economy is booming. So it may, doesn't make it less hard to deal with or scary or any of that, but at least as a starting point, understand that in this job, in this employment environment right now, which is extremely different from what it was just a couple of months ago, where, it was hard to find people, all of a sudden, it's hard sometimes to keep your job. Um, People are understanding that actually a lot of people are getting laid off right now. And some of it isn't really a layoff. Some of it is actually that, your job was not going to be yours much longer anyway, and the timing overlapped. But for a lot of people, it is a layoff, and it's not necessarily discriminatory around your performance or anything else. It has to do with your unit or your line of business or your role or whatever. And X number of people had to be laid off, and however they arrived at that decision. So look at the facts instead of the emotion, because when you're in that place, it's hard not to take it personally. So try to look more broadly as, okay, well, who's in the same boat as me? It's probably not just you. So having a story around that, and I don't say story meaning made up, but there is probably a very good factual explanation that would sit fine with a hiring manager or an HR manager or recruiter, because it's understood a lot of people are losing their jobs right now. So, is it, did you work on small business? And, I was an underwriter for restaurants and small retail. And like, okay, we get that. A lot of restaurants are not going to be around or are not around anymore. So it would make sense that there'd be less demand for your line of business. I'm not even going to ask about your performance because I understand, like, oh yeah, you were in that space. I get it. It contracted. So I think that is a great example of that fear, that actually the reality is it's probably not as profound as you think it is. And just understand how to talk about it. This is what my business went through. This is how I was affected. And it means I get to look for a new opportunity.
Thanks. We have some more questions. One of them says, what specific actions do you take to help you live in the present or focus on the moment?
Yeah. Well, I'll give a little bit of context of what I'm going through right now. So you mentioned I was at Hi Marley last year, and I had this brilliant idea of, everyone's been telling me I should go off on my own for years and do consulting work. I used to do it for companies. And I said, you know what? Hi Marley's in a good place. I'm not a sales guy by nature, but I was running sales for them, and it was going well, but ultimately they need a real salesperson. So let me wind down the year, and then I'll go off on my own starting Jan 1. And one of the things I've been working on is my new book that comes out next month about insurers facing disruption and how they can evolve through it. Because that's something I faced in my job selling a tech solution to carriers that felt like they were stuck, like they were behind. Um, so great idea and excitement about it. And I had all of the speaking activity lined up because as an author and a speaker, like that's how I support my family if I don't have a day job. And as you can imagine, one by one, every single speaking opportunity I had was canceled, or they went virtual in some cases. And they're like, oh, well, we're not charging people to attend, so we can't pay our speakers anymore. And so I went from like, it's going to be a slow build, but I've got this business I'm putting together and it's going to be great. And then everything vanished. So, very much in that same kind of feeling. And that's a day-to-day thing. And while my wife is still alive and she's better in a lot of respects, she also still suffers from a chronic illness, that has a lot of expenses with it. So it's not like I don't need to work. Certainly still have financial pressures. And so, it was very much front and center for me. With each day, a new opportunity that I had would be gone. Or, that person I was starting to talk to about something else, they've got their hands full. And so that thing fizzles and they don't know what their budgets look like and they don't know when they'll have people back together again. I mean, my main income source is based on having large gatherings of people. So when's that going to happen? So I've absolutely been in the midst of this and having to practice what I preach. I'm not just sitting here talking about something that doesn't really affect me. This is very real for me. So what I keep asking myself is what I said before, is this happening right now? Am I losing every potential speaking opportunity for the rest of my career right now? No, obviously not. Doesn't mean the idea of it isn't scary. Doesn't mean it's just not unsettling. It is unsettling. It is scary. I don't know what's going to happen, but none of that's happening right now. The only thing that's happening right now is the opportunities I'm working on at the moment. And that includes things that, yeah, I may not be making money off of them to support my family right now, but they might be growing my network or building more opportunities for me down the road. And so making decisions like that, I was able to say yes to some things that actually, if I was out like traveling to do a speaking engagement I couldn't have taken on, and they have opened completely different doors for me that I know will be very valuable down the road, even if they're not doing anything financially right now. So I do find myself on a regular basis recentering on what is it I'm working on right now? What is it that I'm afraid about? And let me pause on that for a minute, recognize it. I'm not just going to stuff it inside and ignore it. It's real. But once I see what it is, I want to learn from it and say, okay, is this happening right now? If the answer is no, then the question is, what am I doing right now that puts me in a better position for that? And if the answer to that is nothing, then either that thing is not as scary as I thought it was because it's not worth me working on anything to do something about it, or maybe there's something I can do in the present moment that puts me in a better position for that.
Okay, we have one more question, and I think then we can move on. It says, is there a specific mantra or thought process that you personally use to help you do a day every day?
Yeah. I mean, people think I'm just plugging the book, but like I actually do say do a day. Um, if I say it out loud with other people around, usually it just gets lots of laughs because they're like, oh, yeah, it's your book. I'm like, no, but I actually do say it to remind myself of that. Whatever the saying is, bring yourself to that saying. So I say do a day in a sort of like light and fun way, like, come on, man, do a day. You can do it. It's sort of like a cheer you on thing. But actually, when it gets deeper, is that saying that I had up on screen before that it's always only today, right now. And that's a really powerful reminder for me that, when you think about all that's on your mind, if it's happening or not happening, when you recognize it's not happening, remind yourself it's always only today, right now. The full saying is actually it's never yesterday and it's never tomorrow. It's always only today, right now. And that comes from a quote from Buddha that I can't pronounce because I don't speak Sanskrit. Um, but it's brilliant, right? Like it is never yesterday and it is never tomorrow. By definition, it's always only right now. And if you can focus on that and really feel the power in that, that allows you to step back from that spiral a little bit, learn from it, but don't let it run your life as it can very easily do if you're not bringing yourself to that present moment. Okay, you still there?
I am still here.
Okay,
I think that those were all the questions we had.
that's great. I would definitely, put up my contact details there. Like, I do want to hear from people. I put out a lot of content on the regular for anyone who follows me on LinkedIn. I'm sorry. Um, I definitely, like Kat knows, like I post a ton. Um, but that's kind of the point, is my mission in all this is really to try to help inspire people. And if what I say doesn't inspire you, that's okay. I try very hard to bring other inspirational people into the fold. And so, I mentioned my podcast earlier. I have just incredible guests on, and it comes out every week. And it's on this theme of do a day. So it's people talking about overcoming, it's people talking about how they move forward in the face of that brick wall or that tragedy, the floor falling out from under them. And it's not light stuff. Um, but that's important because we all have a different backstory. We all have a different reason why that anxiety can get us at times and why we might struggle in the present moment. And so hearing from different people with different backstories, maybe one of those resonates with you and gives you that path to move forward. So, people can check everything out there, bryanfalchuk.com. If you can spell my name, you can find me, and you can link to my podcast and everything else from there. But I'd love to hear from people. And if you're struggling with any of this, like, definitely reach out. That's what I'm here for, is to try to help people with that.